Today, again, as usual, backed by popular demand, we have Graham Furnis with us. Graham is the principal practice at WG Furnis Enterprises Limited and a strong partner of the ThoughtRock Group. He has over 20 years of experience in information technology covering a broad range of skill sets and industries. Graham's ITIL certified as an ITIL expert, ITIL service manager, and holds the ITIL lifecycle stream certifications. He is active as an ITIL consultant, program, and project manager, a certified instructor, and a regular industry speaker and article writer. I'd now like to turn it over to Graham for the rest of the session. Thanks, Graham.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Rick, and it's great to be back doing a presentation with ThoughtRock after a couple of months of busy projects, which leads into our topic for today, which is about service and project management. And I picked this topic just to kind of go over the different frameworks that I follow and promote in doing all of my different work. And of course, I've been making several presentations recently just about the need for, if you're going to be successful with your service management initiatives, you've got to be able to put the pieces in place, and doing it not in a bureaucratic but in a formal and well-defined way with project management really makes a difference. And so hopefully today gives you a couple of insights and neat little ways of understanding how both project and service management, they're synergistic and they combine well with each other. So it's a nice light presentation, and we'll start off and just cover some of the basic definitions. Okay, and I could have put a few different ones on here, or a few extra, but we'll just do the basic things. I think you've heard of so many service management definitions. I've just added a few of my own words here. But basically, service management, and the way I always promote it, is a business approach. It's an organizational strategy in itself to decide that you're going to work in a service management way of doing things. And as we all well know from the ThoughtRock platform and so many presentations here, one of the most well-known frameworks, which is what I'm going to be working or just discussing today in conjunction with project management, but that's our ITIL framework. So it gives us a good set of processes and best practices within those for how we go about this business approach for doing service management. So then I've added a couple of other little definitions here for, to give substance to today's presentation. So then we have our IT operations management. Important to know, because even though you're adopting a service management approach, there's different ways of handling, incidents and doing that reactive support activity. But it's all part of the real purpose of having a service management approach is to continue delivering well-structured and well-organized and supported IT services. And it's critical to kind of think of that, because when I start putting some diagrams together in a few more slides, the whole purpose of service management is to provide that stability to operations, which is what we want as customers, and again, formulating everything in the format here of IT services. So the main word I want to stress here, and I'll circle, I love drawing on these screens to give it a bit of life, but operations is ongoing. It's a continuous effort. There's really no right or wrong actions, because you're constantly making decisions and moving things forward and adjusting your environments and building them up. So what feeds the operational environment and builds up your service management capability and approach are projects. And each project is, by pure definition, a temporary endeavor to produce a product, service, or a result. So in today's presentation, I'm going to kind of merge these definitions together into some nice little sort of flow diagrams, which gives a good sense about if I'm going to undertake to adopt an ITIL and a service management approach and try and improve our ongoing operations. We want to also see how can I do this and how can I make use of my project management processes and best practices to do it. So enough with these definitions. Let's start to flesh out our presentation, and we'll take a look at how the two different frameworks, specifically service management with ITIL and project management, using the Project Management Book of Knowledge framework. Let's get a basic idea about how these things flow together. Okay, so in this screen we have the project management lifecycle on the top, and we have the service lifecycle from the ITIL framework shown on the bottom. And just as a quick recap, so these are the process groups which generally flow from beginning to end. Starting at the bottom, right, we have strategy, which gives us our purpose and our overall definitions of service. We then need to design and decide what our plans are and our agreements before we can do the transition and getting things into ongoing service operation and adopting a continual improvement approach. So you'll see there's a little bit of similarity on the screens here. ITIL defines a 5-stage life cycle, and funny enough, in the project management world we have a 5-stage life cycle approach as well. And you notice there's a bit of a parallel in sort of the terminology and even in the way the diagram currently fits. So we have project initiation, project planning, so coming up with all of our ways of doing the project and getting agreements to sign off. Then we get to actually doing the project and starting to produce all the different pieces. And I'm going to draw a straight line here just to make it look interesting. So then we have, during that execution, we have our ongoing project monitoring and control, and eventually we get to project close. And
so Graham, just a quick question. So are you suggesting, I mean, as you mentioned, they're in parallel and they're kind of lining up. Are you suggesting that just different terminology, but they're the same things?
They're not the same thing, and it's a great question. But what you find is that you have a lot of synergy and parallel type of activities. The project initiation phase is really where we want to focus on justifying why we're doing the project. And one of the things you need to go to is everything needs to link to a business strategy. And if you look down below in the ITIL life cycle, it defines the strategy about why we're doing things. So really, it's these things work in parallel. They're different sets of processes within each of these groupings. The lower level focuses on ITIL and how do you come up with a business strategy and a service strategy, and then how do you prioritize. That's the business case for doing something. And under the project initiation at the top here, this is where you want to bring that business case in to say, well, we can't do everything, and when we take on an initiative, we want to do it as a project. So we do the prioritized projects. But instead of reinventing the wheel, the information is all down here already about what's important to the organization and why we're doing things. When you start to plan your project up in this level here, well, that's where you start to use the best practices within the project management book of knowledge and other project management frameworks out there. But this is where you start to build up, here's how I'm going to do the project in terms of managing it. And then the project produces an output. Well, the output we're producing here is down below, right? If you want to know what you're supposed to do in some type of ITIL initiative, the service design best practices and concepts, that tells you what you need to produce. So now I need to take all of these sort of plans and guidance from down here and add it to my project. So the project makes sure that we have a set of best practices to do our project well up here, and then we have to make sure that whatever we're producing fits the operational environment in the ITIL example, and all of that information comes from this lower level. So there is a bit of a parallel in that as you're running through the ITIL life cycle, you're also running through and producing documents which will be taken into the project management life cycle to say, here's what we're actually doing. And then, so there is a bit of a parallel here. When I'm executing the project, I'm going to be running through and keeping track of my scope and schedule and keeping everything on track. And then what I'm producing, though, well, that's from the service transition level here. These are all of my configuration items and other different components that ITIL specifies as being necessary when you start structuring should it be a process you're producing or a new type of IT service and technology. All of it comes from below. So what I'm suggesting is that if you have a good service management structure and way of organizing information, then that makes it nice and easy to start planning your projects, because as you run through each of the steps up above and the life cycle stages, you can pull all your information out from below. So then I'm going to draw a little line here. In the ITIL concepts, when we're doing transition, there's an overlap where you don't just simply install and walk away. You make sure that things are being properly accepted and signed off, and you're monitoring for a period of time to make sure we've got some stability. And this is where, in the project management side of things, these two pieces up above fall into this section here, and then the project drops off. Right? So a project, going back to our definitions, a project is a temporary endeavor. It's meant to do something, either introduce a new process or a new technology. And once it successfully introduces it and follows the ITIL concept here of getting proper sign-off and validation that everything is working fine, then that's the end of our project. And then here's where the project management concept no longer applies. This is all ongoing operations. Right? So things are operational. We go into the service improvement life cycle. And from the service improvement life cycle, there's a feedback loop. So you can tell I love my diagrams. But the feedback loop here is that when you're doing service improvements, we're going to come up with a long list about things that, they aren't quite working well, or we could improve in these different aspects. And in the ITIL concepts, this becomes a database of, or a list of things that can be improved. It's called the CSI register. And what we end up doing is that this CSI register goes back into service strategy to say, well, what are the issues? What services are they affecting? And what's our priorities? The things that are a priority and need to be improved, well, that's going to become a new project to do some type of improvement again and implement something back into the operations environment. So as messy as we made this diagram, the key here is that we have two overlapping best practice frameworks. When they created these frameworks, each borrows from the other when they're coming up with a set of best practice. When you're actually creating something in the ITIL way of doing things, again, you've got a set of IT-specific best practice things to do, which run along, from strategy all the way through to transition. And then we need to take that as an input into our project management framework and our ways of doing things into the project initiation, planning, and execution. And an easy way of just visualizing the two things is that they do run in parallel. They're different processes because one is how you run the project, and the other is what you're producing from the project down below. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a concept that all of these best practices that are out there, they're all process management based. When you run a project, there's a bunch of processes to keep the project on track and to keep it aligned to the business vision and requirements. And down below in the ITIL framework, we've got the same thing, but this is now the product in terms of the IT service or the infrastructure for that service that needs to be produced. So another little diagram, which I've got here just to kind of give you a sense that, we are looking at best practice frameworks, and they are very similar in concept. And the reason they're similar in concept, I'll put in a little acronym here that I think everyone should know. If not, I'll do a little description. But Plan, Do, Check, Act. Both frameworks follow the Deming concept and the continual improvement concept of Plan, Do, Check, Act. So within the ITIL diagram on the right-hand side, right, all of our planning can, to make the diagram simple for now in the life cycle flow, we can think that our planning's coming from coming up with a strategy about what's important and what's not, and then coming up with all of our plans and designs and service design. From the project side, well, you got the word planning in one of these pieces, but project initiation, because of the parallel that we're seeing, that's the planning aspect of the project management life cycle. Then you get to the doing. So we have execution over here. We have transition over here. Now, doing is actually a combination. When you're running a project, you've got this feedback loop back to the planning. Because quite often when you're running a project, just to do the project on time, you have to have this feedback to know, is my schedule on track or off track? What about my cost budget? What's happening with the scope of what I'm doing? And then so the project monitor and control is basically the equivalent to service improvement. But where service improvement is more long-term in the ITIL life cycle, this is more short-term in relation to the life of the project. So these are very much the same, except that, again, the service management life cycle is meant for a combination of both, here's things that parallel the project, and then here's things to do that go on long-term, versus, again, the project is just meant to put the pieces in place. So I'm quite solid in my my experience and my advice that when you're doing service management initiatives, if you're going to start adopting service management best practices, you might want to, actually I would advise also adopting project management best practices, because there's a lot of commonality shared between them, and putting the pieces into place, it's an ongoing set of projects, so the better off you become at doing these projects and keeping them focused on strategy, the better off the overall result of your ITSM initiatives will be. So the last little sort of fun diagram I have, just to give a bit more meat.
And Graham, just a quick question. Just a quick question on that last slide. So again, just a clarification. So in terms of how they work together, I guess kind of a chicken and egg question is it project and then service, or service and then project? Just kind of clarify that.
Yep. I guess it depends. If we're talking about an ITIL initiative, it depends on which comes first. Most companies are currently in existence and they're looking to do some type of improvement. When you go to do that improvement, if you have some type of ITIL structure in place, then you'd go back and you'd have a CSI register and do the business case and say, okay, well, let's now trigger a project. But if you're starting from the very beginning and there's nothing in place, you might start with the project to create this service management structure, which will then start feeding the next follow-up projects and business cases to keep on adding pieces into the picture. So actually, it's a good way to sort of segue into my my next slide, because that's what I try and do, is just give another visual about what's kind of an operational picture between projects and operations and service management. So this one, I've created a slide where I have a couple of fly-ins to make it simple at the beginning, and then we'll layer in some of the additional pieces to make it a bit more interesting. So operations management, right? It's ongoing. We're going to continue to be in operations, and the goal of most companies is that that never ends. And again, you may have been doing ITIL from the very beginning up here, or maybe, whoops, I'm spelling that backwards, or maybe have it further into your operations environment. Whatever it might be, let's assume that we have ITIL from the very get-go here. And so what we're trying to do then, we're trying to formulate and adopt this ITSM service management approach, and everything in our service catalog we're producing as an IT service and putting it out there for our customers. So to back up delivering the goods and doing it in a proper way, right, we're going to follow best practice frameworks. Again, as ThoughtRock does so much of, we focus on the ITIL framework, but there's other things out there, Six Sigma, capability maturity models. And when you read into the nitty-gritty and you start doing this work, ITIL is great, but again, it benefits by having so many other best practice frameworks out there to be used at the right places at the right time. But certainly ITIL is very encompassing and a great place to start. So we'll assume we have got the ITIL framework, and again, from my previous slide, here's the different life cycle stages. And this is just an ongoing cycle, right? If I draw in my little feedback loop here, every time we implement something and we get into steady state operations, which is this big blue box up here, then we're constantly doing regular service improvement and feeding back into that strategy. So now in terms of the our operational environment, we need to structure in, as I mentioned, the advantage of having projects. So projects are constantly happening at your company. You may have official projects or non-official projects. They may be large, they may be small, but you're nonstop doing these IT projects to build up your IT operations infrastructure, and ultimately also to deliver these IT services down here at the bottom. So we're putting these pieces into place. Let me just clean up my slide for a minute. There we go. Makes it easier to read. The next piece is coming in. So with your IT projects, you definitely need anyone who knows all the process elements down here in the framework. You need to put your process structure into place. You need to put your documentation for that project structure into place so that your staff and organization know what to do for each different process and to manage each different service. You can't do things these days without some type of technology tools and information databases. So all of these IT projects, they build up the infrastructure, or they may directly build up a combination of the infrastructure and the IT service itself. And as to how many projects you have and when you do them and how you fund them, well, as we talked about, that comes from service strategy. Gives a justification about what needs to be done. So in just adding a bit more here, up on the project side, if we're a company following best practices operationally, why wouldn't you follow best practices in the project world? And again, I'm talking about the life cycle coming from the Project Management Book of Knowledge, but it too is, like in the ITIL world, it borrows from other best practices to make sure that we're doing projects in a proper way. And again, from the previous page, here's the project life cycle. And this life cycle is not recursive like the bottom ITIL life cycle. Every project, once you do the project close and everything gets accepted, then the project is finished. We move on to the next one, or we have others going in parallel, and then we have a very aligned and best practice way of making sure that each of these projects up here is properly run, is delivering the goods that need to get into the this operational infrastructure down here, and then it's then able to properly support and produce these IT services. So I find a lot of times the smaller initiatives just to do improvement without really tying things into your project management practice tend to lose a lot of ground. Now, just to keep our presentation to the lunch hour schedule, and there's not too many more slides left, but I've got a couple of more graphics to add on to our current slide. So hopefully you see the parallel here of how projects keep feeding into our operations environment and our ongoing delivery. And to feed those projects and tell us how we do things, we have the ITIL life cycle to provide the inputs. And what I wanted to do, again, let me clean up my screen, is just give an idea about some of the outputs from the ITIL life cycle below in these yellow highlights, and how they can parallel and be used in your project management practices. So I'll bring up two sets of documents. So, obviously there's many different documents recommended in both the ITIL framework and also the project framework, but look at the parallels of where you can find a lot of synergy between these two things. So in service strategy, this is where we focus on defining our services and coming up with our service catalog. We then come up with the business case about what's important and how we properly allocate and spend funds. And again, this links up here to project initiation. Whenever we start doing a project, you need to know the project's business case. And instead of just searching and making up a new business case for something every time a project comes up, you want to stay aligned to the big picture, which is managed by service strategy down below. So it really speeds up that initiating aspect of a project because you know why you're doing it and you know the proper sponsors and how to get everything started up. So then you go into the next step and you know, all of our different agreements out of service design, service level agreements, all of the different plans and designs. This is how we do things in the ITIL and the IT world. And these become inputs up here because when we start planning the project, we have our project way of planning the different steps of how we're going to eventually build and implement. But what we're building and implementing is already done for us because it comes out of the ITIL lifecycle. So if you're wondering in a project, what should I do to create a new service? Look to the ITIL framework and it'll tell you. You need a service level agreement. You need plans for capacity, availability, continuity, security. You need the underlying technical designs. All of those things are handed over to the project, and then the project says, great, we know what to do. Now we just have to sequence it and put it into our project schedule.
Graham, a couple of questions right now if you can kind of take a pause. Is that okay? It's a good
Sure.
time to
Yeah,
ask
that's
questions.
great.
Okay. One I think is a little bit more straightforward from a standpoint of, I guess it's just really language, but I think often it seems like we use the term project planning, at least when I see in IT projects, project planning before project initiation. Is there anything you can talk to in that? Because I just look at your diagram here, and I think the tasks are the same, but sometimes I hear planning first, then initiation. I'm just wondering what the rationale is for the difference.
Yeah, there is actually, like in ITIL, everything is integrated in these frameworks, and you kind of go back and forth a bit. I guess the misconception of saying planning comes before initiation is like you'd say in the bottom of this diagram where design would come before strategy. So if you think about the ITIL lifecycle terminology and you think about that in the project world, when you do project initiation, what you're really doing there is you're doing the strategy. You're trying to justify, should we do this project? Do we have a sponsor? Is the sponsor going to pay a budget to get something done? And so that's really the justification about, you know, you could put the word in. This is where people get maybe a little bit confused between the words. You could say that you're planning to do the project under initiation, but what you're really doing, you're lining up all your ducks and you're making sure that, again, you've got visibility to say the project should be done and it's justified by a business case. And once you get out of initiation, you then said, okay, I've approved that we should be doing this project. The business case justifies it and backs it up. I've got a sponsor and I've got my funding. So then you can say, okay, well, now that I've got funding, now I can spend time and resources to go out and start planning the project. So this is why the terminology should always have planning after initiation, because you know, you've already done some high-level planning with initiation. To do a business case, you have to kind of say, well, what's it roughly going to cost us, and what are roughly the pieces to do this project,
right,
which become the high end of planning.
Okay.
But to really flesh out your plans, you know, that needs a go-ahead to say, yeah, we agree that from this point we should be doing it. Let's flesh out the detail of our plans. That would be pure project planning. And you do a check at each point. The whole concept of plan, do, check, act is through every one of these life cycle stages. If your plans come back and say, well, you know, from the high end of the initiation, we thought this project would only be, let's put a number out there of $50,000. Then you start planning it out, and we start to follow, you know, here's what ITIL says we should be doing, and we start to bring that into our project, and we start to sequence it out, and we start costing it, and we realize, well, it's looking more like it's 100 to 150,000. You might just do a little plan, do, check, act, going back to the initiation and saying, well, it's a bit different than the business case assumptions, because as you open up cans of worms, you certainly find worms and all over the place. And then you may decide that, with that kind of a cost structure, now we're not going to go ahead and finish off the execution or anything else.
Okay.
Yeah.
A couple more questions. What is the output from service strategy that would generate a project?
It's the business case. In the IT, if you're following an ITIL framework, think about portfolio management, where you have your service catalog, and it's also the point at which in an ITIL framework you look at your ITSM infrastructure and say, what are all the pieces out there in terms of our process departments and our process tools and so on, and what services are being supported. So you need to come up, every company needs to come up with a justification. In the project management world, one of the first rules is that whenever you come up with a project charter and a justification for doing things, you need to link it to business strategy to justify why one project should be done over another. And that's as part of governance, which you may have heard of several times, or in your organization I make a little mention of it in the next couple of slides. But this is where service strategy fits in. It tells you in an easy way, if you're maintaining a service catalog and you know how important specific services are to the organization, maybe you're producing revenue to your customers from that, then you can start to say the initiatives that belong to that service, I can start listing them out and say, well, this is an important service, therefore what we do to it is an important business case. And you can just start justifying your projects that way. So the key is to understand in the ITIL framework is that everything is in a service-oriented way of thinking, ties into your service catalog. We have business impact and priorities built into that catalog, and it makes it nice and easy, clear and visible to everyone about why some projects should be done and others shouldn't be done.
Okay, great. And the last question right now, I might as well get to them just as we're at 12:40 here. When there are two activities that are addressed in both PMBOK and ITIL, which framework takes precedent?
The answer is both. And the reason I say both is that, again, it's where I've done a lot of work recently, just trying to build up project management offices and also building up ITIL approach and ITIL type offices. If you're dealing with quality within project management, you're dealing with the quality about, how am I going to produce products that are properly accepted at the right quality levels? And those quality levels, be it uptime sort of designs or contingency planning and so on, they're more technical about the hardware and the service coming from the lower level here, initially out of service design and so on. So the project is concerned about getting the right product requirements. So what we're producing is down here. We're producing some type of service management infrastructure, be it a service or be it the underlying tools and technology. And then the project says, great, I need to conduct my project with the same level of checks and balances that are equivalent to the business case here, justification. If I'm dealing with, let's just take Google. I don't know, I'm just pulling something out of the air here. But Google provides the online search engine. And if that ever went down, you can imagine that would be a major impact to that organization. So any project doing any work on that customer-facing piece of the infrastructure for Google, you know that that project's going to have every check and balance in place because failure is not an option. And so you want the quality of the project to match the importance and the impact of the product you're producing down in the ITIL service delivery level. Okay, so that's my answer to that, is that one doesn't take precedence over the other. You need to produce a product based on a business case to the right levels, and the project needs to have equivalent project checks and balances to make sure that we're doing it at the right level. So hopefully that's answered that person's question.
Yeah, I think that's good, Graham. Thanks.
Yeah. And then, really we're at the end of the presentation anyway, even though this is a slide I've been working on for a bit. This is the main sort of one that hopefully brings out, these concepts. So just to finish it off, so when we start producing configuration items out of my project, right, the project makes sure that these are called the deliverables. Each deliverable is then tested and accepted. And so it's just following the same concepts from the ITIL framework, and we're testing it at the same levels based upon the impact of the service defined by the ITIL framework. So we have the same type of thing here. You're doing a transfer and acceptance. You're doing a transfer and acceptance in the project. These things are happening as the project and the transition concepts are so interconnected. And then monitor and control is to make sure that while we're doing all these things, we're properly doing the project. And eventually, the project will be finished and closed. And that's where we reach this line down here, where again, everything from the left-hand side of that line is project management, and then it's just ongoing operations to the right of that line. And here's where you've implemented your process and your documentation. That creates all of these different models to follow and guide you operationally. And then you have a different thing. This isn't project acceptance down here. This is ongoing yearly review of your service catalog and your service level agreements to make sure that operationally, do we need to implement new projects to improve something or whatever it might be. So I recommend, again, when you're doing ITIL implementations, following a best practice approach for implementation is, an ideal way to go with project management. There's two separate frameworks. The project management framework says, here's how you properly manage a project. And part of that framework says, go and find the correct way of implementing the products of the project, which come from, is given to you by the ITIL framework. So the ITIL framework tells you, here's what you need to produce. The project framework says, here's how we properly run a project to produce what we're supposed to produce. And the two work so perfectly in parallel that I'm a huge proponent. It's a strong part of what I'm doing in my current practices. So the last slide is just I've got I think two, and they're simply a couple of definitions about what I said about earlier, governance. So the thing with both of these frameworks, they both, I'm going to go back up a slide. They both point at the very beginning of the slide to strategy and business case. And governance is making sure that everything we do is transparent and that everything is justified about doing corporate priorities based upon a business case. So both frameworks will accomplish this. Governance is a key word these days. Depends on the type of company and the environment you're in. But governance is also about making sure that we're doing the right things and we're getting the right results. And the thing I love here is that without some type of governance, be it formal, be it compliance, or be it just you have a service management sort of governance framework. I love the term penny wise, pound foolish, because you end up doing a lot of improvement initiatives, but in the end, are you spending money where you should? Are you making improvements where you should? You need a bit of a higher structure to help you, focus on those business priorities. And so this is my last slide here before we look at questions. Here's where I might suggest in your organization, you can structure a couple of different terms and departments. So when it comes down to strategy and built into the concepts of, higher levels of project management, portfolio management, basically, if you've got a high-profile part of your business, for example, you have a service management initiative, right? That should be organizationally impacting and business revenue impacting down the road. So you want to manage it as a portfolio, which is really at the high strategic levels. What it does, it makes sure that everything you do is focused on that type of priority. If you have an ongoing initiative sharing common resources or common projects, then you might want some program management to do some coordination. And then underneath this, here's where you have different best practice offices. So, to say, well, we've got portfolio and program management to kind of give governance and direction to all the different things we're doing across the organization, and we're focused on our priorities. How do we do it well? So we have a project management office, tells us how to do projects well. We have a service management quite often you hear them called best practice offices, but we have something to keep track of. Here's how we do our service management approach well. And then you may have an operations office as well. Here's where you may have your governance or other best practice offices operationally, so that you can merge together all these best practice frameworks, but you have guidance up above here to say, well, you can't do it all, and you can't do it all at once. So how do we properly sequence and implement things into place? Having this type of a structure is a huge piece where ITIL alone is not enough. It needs to fit into the big picture and the big organization, and it needs to be funded. So again, having this portfolio concept at the top makes a big difference, because it is a big organizational effort. So there's my presentation for the day. Hopefully that was not too many slides. We didn't cover too much, but enough to hopefully give you an idea about the benefits of both frameworks. And I'll finish it off here. And Rick, if there's any questions or comments or discussions, I'd love to answer any questions.
No, that's great, Graham. And right now, I kind of stopped you on the fly there and interrupted you and asked the questions that were being posted. So right now, I think we've got through them all. So I'm going to give everyone a few more minutes if they have other questions. I know in the attendees group here, we have a number of other folks who have significant background in both ITIL and project management or PMO offices. So if anybody's got any specific questions, it'd be a great opportunity to post them and have Graham address them from that perspective, especially from the duo experience, the ITIL experience, and the project management office. While we're waiting for that, just a couple things again. Next week at Tuesday, October 30th, we have Pete Talks, our first session, changing the way we work together, the DevOps opportunity, where we've got facilitator Pete McGarrahan and industry expert William Keyworth to discuss the elephant in the room, how development and the service and support teams can work together for better of the business. So if that's relevant to you, please come back tomorrow or next Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or forward that to a colleague if it's something that you think would be relevant to them. We'd hope to have someone from your organization on that call, and our first of a number of series hosted by Pete McGarrahan and his various guests that he'll have throughout the year. So if there aren't any other questions, Graham, I want to just say thanks again for another great session. If you want to pull up your slide where you've got some contact information up there, perfect. So a couple different things you can do, folks who are on the line. You can always email info@thoughtrock.com with ideas for additional content, presentations, follow-up sessions to this one that Graham has. If you want to reach out to Graham directly, you've got his email and his website there. So please feel free to follow up directly with Graham as well with any questions or further discussion. So again, I'd like to say thank you again, Graham. And Graham, if you have any other final comments with respect to this topic, I'll let you do that now. Otherwise, we will sign off soon.
Yeah, no, I actually enjoyed kind of going through and showing the both frameworks. Hopefully high level enough to give people a few new thoughts, which is what I like to do in these presentations. So I'm looking forward to the next time I can speak on ThoughtRock, and the series that you just mentioned too sounds really interesting, so I'm looking forward to tuning into that. So with that, I'll thank everyone. I'll thank you, Rick and Jeannie, for coordinating, and we'll look forward to talking to you the next time I'm here.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Graham, and thanks everybody.
Okay.
Bye-bye.